All right. Hey, I want to do a quick follow up to the video that I did the other day on the golden age of FinPub, and where I talked about the different tailwinds that have been fueling our industry for the last 10 years. And that those, just as a quick recap, were the massive growth in actual brokerage accounts, the actual retail investor, like prospect universe growth. And we had, of course, the longest bull market in history, but then there was also this growth in the number of platforms that went through this lag time between their user growth and their revenue growth on that platform, right? So the people were growing platforms, user-based platforms really fast. And as the revenue picks up in terms of the platform generating revenue from that traffic, there's a period of time where we have scale and we have really great ROI. And then that tends to go away as that platform starts to squeeze out their own revenue and profit, because your ROI is their margin in a lot of sense. And there's also a lot more competition. There's bigger competition. There's all the things that I talked about in that video. And so the reason I want to do this video today is to ask the question, is Telegram going to soon turn over into a phenomenal traffic acquisition source for different subsets in the market and then eventually become a scaled source, or will it never become a good traffic source? And the reason that Telegram is so interesting right now is what I have here is their user growth data compared to their revenue data, right? And they literally just started generating revenue. And as you can see, like from 2014 to 2021, they had kind of this explosive growth in user base, right? They've gone from a little bit up to about 500,000 people. I think they're actually higher than this number in 2022. I think it was 700 million. So this trend has continued last year, but at the same time, because of actually the crypto boom, Telegram hasn't really managed to build an advertising platform that has really taken off in terms of revenue. Now they do have an advertising platform, and this is really interesting because they had a failed altcoin launch, right? Like there was a whole, everyone remembers this. It was in the news with the SEC. They kind of stopped it, but they tried to monetize with a coin rather than with an advertising platform first. And so what, which is not normal for most of the other apps out there, right? Only one other major platform has done something similar, and I'll get to that in a second. And what's interesting is you have a platform that has really interesting user growth, right? It's starting to scale. It's getting to that point where they should start generating a ton in revenue, but this is their revenue here on the right? You see last in 2022, you're talking about hundreds of thousands a month. In January was their best month ever of 2023. They had 1.6 million in revenue. And the reason for this massive gap, because we've never seen a gap like this in a platform that has this kind of user growth and this shitty of revenue, is because of that focus that they had. And my belief is because of that focus they had on that altcoin, and that they were going to make all their money with a crypto coin, and their users were going to own the platform and all that kind of stuff. Versus just trying to build an advertising platform, which is kind of the most proven model for a scaled up social channel out there. And because of that, you have this really interesting situation where right now their ability to drive traffic from that audience looks pretty anemic. And so I'm not telling you that if you go advertise on Telegram right now, you're going to have this amazing ROI. Um, the important point here is that that could happen in the near future if their advertising platform gets, like, if they put all their focus back on developing the advertising channel that this platform should be, and you can advertise there. And I want to try and find some people we can talk to who have had some success advertising there. But the thing is that if they can make the advertising channel work, right? If they can serve ads that are actually targeting and engaging, this could be a phenomenal traffic source in the near future because of this huge gap in their ability to monetize that audience compared to the audience growth itself. And so they focused a lot on this audience growth, which is what they should be doing at this stage. That altcoin thing kind of, hopefully went away. If they just focus on the ad side, which they should be doing, and I think they are, then if this growth continues, and like I said, I just found it was a different data source, so I didn't include it in here, but I did find a 2022 data that said it was 700 million, not 500 million. So that growth is there, and it's kind of continued, right? Because it actually grew more in 2022 than it did in 2021 then. And there's a couple of things about this. One is, yes, to focus on Telegram for a second. Over the next year, 2 years, if we start to see that ad platform take off, all of you people who do acquire through primary traffic sources, not secondary traffic sources. And by that, I mean, if you're out there actually buying media directly through Google, Facebook, right, you're going to the actual traffic store, as it were, and trying to select audience, then this becomes one of those channels that you should have on your radar, not necessarily to dive in and throw all your money in right now, but it should be something that's being checked in on, because if the platform for advertising starts to work, there's going to be a period of time where we have that Wild West period again, where it would work really well, right? But right now, because this type of revenue from this type of user base is just, I mean, it's unheard of, and I think it's largely because they haven't focused on advertising. So if they make that switch and they do it well, or well enough, this is a channel that could become very, very profitable for a period of time. And as direct marketers online, we all know, like, those Wild West periods are where you can get so much leverage in your growth. And if you can acquire a ton of customers in traffic during a period of time where the Wild West period, where that ROI attention arbitrage is super in your favor, then the growth that fuels can kind of sustain you and get you to a point in the business where you can go after other more expensive traffic more effectively, and things like that. But those kind of boosts are just so important, and they're more important for the smaller and mid-sized companies than they are for like the larger scaled publishers, just because that period of time, like I said in that last video, um, the scale isn't always there yet in terms of the average. Like here you have some scale, but the advertising model to effectively get your ad in front of that scale is in development, basically, right? Because the platform has to start to develop it. They have to start to fix it, adjust it, tweak it, optimize it, try and optimize their needs in terms of revenue versus the advertiser's needs. Like there's a whole thing that has to happen, and that takes time. And that time is the ROI opportunity when it's there. And so the other point about this is not about Telegram, and that is about how to use this comparison of user data and revenue data to be more predictive about which platforms are going to be coming online that are going to be valuable, and time, starting to time your testing and entry into those platforms. I think this is a really critical thing in terms of focusing on resources right now. Those of you who are buying traffic on a secondary basis, excuse me, like from an ad platform or an ad network, or from affiliate traffic, or just advertising in other people's newsletters and things like that, this is less important to you, because those other traffic sources are driving from the primary into they're aggregating traffic into a platform that they can then sell to you. But all the primary sources, including social, from the content perspective, search, all those things are really interesting. And that's why, like, Telegram with this kind of user growth would suggest that at this stage of the game, having content creation and trying to tap into the existing audience on a content basis is a really good play from a smaller publisher perspective, um, or at least testing it and seeing if you can kind of get some traction there, because the user growth is there. It hasn't been fully monetized. That means there's a lot of untapped attention, in the sense that they're not being oversold. They're not being beat up with ads right now. The attention is more pure, right? It's like in that pure form, where it hasn't been like just eaten up by an abundance of advertising that just starts to flood the platform. Kind of like how we're seeing with YouTube right now, how like they've increased the number of ads, and now they've added ads in the middle of longer videos in multiple times. It's almost like old school TV, where like you're watching it and then here's 30 to 30 seconds to 2 minutes of ads. Keep watching your video. Here's another section of ads, right? So you can see that inundation happening on YouTube in terms of the ad platform as they start to increase their ability to monetize that audience, because when the audience growth stops accelerating too much, then their only real profit opportunity is to become more efficient and get a better ROI or LTV from their existing traffic, right? So this way of thinking about traffic platforms allows you to be a bit more predictive about what's coming next, rather than waiting to hear, oh, somebody's made it work and the Wild West period is over, because now I know that all these people made it work because they found it, they figured it out, they made it work. I'm going to go in and advertise, and oh man, it's just not as good as it was. That all these people who are now teaching me how to do it tell me it is. And like I said in that other video, these these Wild West periods on these platforms are shrinking in time because the you know the platform, like the knowledge base out there on how to monetize an audience like this from an advertising platform perspective is increasingly sophisticated, and it's a much more known playbook. So if Telegram switches over to that kind of a revenue model for themselves, we're going to see this period of time really be good for a period, and then it will slowly degrade just like it has on every other platform. Now, the other company that kind of had this altcoin thing was Reddit, which is really interesting, right? Reddit was all over the news, right? But here's Reddit's user growth. It's not as big as Telegram, actually. Their growth is less. But their revenue growth was really interesting. They had an explosion in revenue here. But it's like 350 million in 2021, where's the last data I have. And so what's interesting about this dynamic is they had their own in-app purchases and their own kind of altcoin, but they also had advertising. Now, when I look at this data, what it says to me about this company is that as the user growth continued, and you can see it kind of started to trail off here, right? In terms of like from 2017 to 2018, you had a bigger jump, just like you had here, but it's kind of smaller jumps right now. And I don't have the last 2 years data on this, so I'm behind on this. But this is kind of to illustrate this point that their revenue growth was explosive here compared to their user growth already, which means they're focusing very early in the relative life cycle of a platform like this on monetization of the platform. Now, this was bought for $20 million by Condé Nast. So Condé Nast is a traditional advertising business, not a Google or Facebook type advertising business, and that kind of culture is probably the reason that this has happened. And that's not a bang, that's not a diss on them, but it's very instructive to see that with this kind of user growth, usually on a platform like TikTok and other places, you wouldn't see, and I'll show that in a second, you don't see at this level of user growth in the $300 to $400 million range, you don't see this explosive growth in revenue yet because they're still focusing on getting the user growth higher, right? So all of the team is focusing on scaling the user base to a higher point to really get that going so that they can then monetize further. And now Reddit's revenue is, like I said, in the $350 million range, which is great. It's a fantastic business. I actually personally love the platform in terms of just usability as a social. Like I like that platform a lot more than a lot of other platforms. But from an advertising perspective, I think it's probably really expensive relative to its user base already, or on the way to being more expensive than its user base. And if this user base doesn't continue to grow at scale, then it just kind of becomes, it stays as this niche kind of platform. And I know we had a huge amount of press for them, right? With the meme stocks. And but it doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily become this huge platform relative to Facebook, like a Facebook or a Google or a YouTube, right? Now that doesn't mean it's a bad place to advertise. This could actually end up in a situation where there's a certain subset of publishers who, because the audience doesn't scale too much more at Reddit, if it doesn't scale too much more, they kind of stay as this niche but big enough universe where a small publisher can actually build a nice revenue stream from that with a combination of content and advertising, because it doesn't ever get to the point where the bigger publishers and the bigger companies in general are able to spend at scale. Their revenue will peter out and it will just be this nice pocket of traffic for everybody. So those are things to watch. But more, I guess, fundamentally, this is how to think about this comparison. It's just this one comparison of users and revenue data when you're looking at these traffic platforms. Now, I compare this to, like, we saw this with what I was saying with YouTube and Google. Like, so their revenue growth period, like on YouTube, if you come down here to 2010, this is about where Reddit is in terms of its user base, and this 2012 period over here is about where Telegram is in its user base. And now I can't even I don't have the revenue data from YouTube going back that far. I only have it from 2015. But even there, you can see that the real pickup in revenue growth didn't happen until 2017. So that's quite a ways past where Telegram and uh, Reddit are, right? And so I feel like Telegram is on this kind of a path, just looking at this number, these basic numbers, if its ad model that it grows becomes effective, which is the other big question: is their advertising product going to actually work for you to tap their user base? And if it does, they're much more on this track than Reddit, whereas Reddit is already trying to monetize what it has as its audience growth seems to be slowing. And so from a long-term focus standpoint, like I would be looking at Telegram's performance over the next 2-3 years much more closely than Reddit's. I'd keep a track on it. This is really easy to see. I have this down here. The business of apps.com tracks all this data for us. It's a fantastic, easy place to look at it. But if you look at this, is really clear compared to um, TikTok. If you look at, their user base was, let's see, 2020, TikTok is over 600 million users for the first time, right? Um, they're still down in 2019. They're still under in the first 2 quarters. They're still under that 300-400 million dollar mark. And come over and look at their revenue. They really didn't start to explode in their revenue growth until 2019, 2020, and then it took off like crazy, right? Because their user growth was dialed in and was happening already. So their user growth here in 2020 um, had a down year, it picks up, and then it continues to grow. And this is the period where they start to monetize, right? Is they're really starting to monetize and dial it in here, and the revenue goes up, and then it gets more expensive. And yeah, if you're a content creator, if that's like the main focus of your social media marketing, then you should be on TikTok. You should have been on there before this. Um, that's where a lot of the growth is. I think that Telegram is really interesting just because of that when you look at that. And so that's kind of the short point of this is that when we talk about things like the growth in ChatGPT, which has had explosive user growth, right? 100 million in 2 months users in 2 months, which is the fastest by far that any platform online has ever gained it. What you're looking at now is this axis of, will the user growth continue, and how fast will they have an effective advertising model, and then how fast will they monetize that model? And one of the dangers of ChatGPT and the other AIs being inside Bing, and then Google having its own that they're going to unleash, is that they're coming into companies who have already figured out how to monetize through advertising at scale. And so they're going to be better at monetizing their audience faster than, say, a Telegram or somebody else who's building it from scratch for the first time. And so um, when, like I said before, when ChatGPT starts taking ads, if it starts taking ads, or if Bing sees an explosion in its user growth again because of using that as integrating that with their search, we're going to see like that period of attention arbitrage from the growing user base that is really powerful, um, with a less optimized ad platform, and that's where your ROI kind of comes. Um, and so that's how to use that frame to start to think about these things. And again, this is only great if you're doing primary traffic, but it's also great if you're looking for content channels that you should be growing with. Um, the thing with like the chat GPT is like it's going to be a new, if it's functioning as it functions now, and we've all used it, where you go in and you type it, and it kind of serves up content in like a chat feed. It's going to need a new advertising model than what Bing has with its search ads and things like that. I think that's going to be interesting to see, is how does the AI kind of, if AI does take over search, and that's like the talk of the town, but it hasn't really happened yet. If it does happen, then the advertising model that they use will change again, funnels and everything else, and that'd be a really interesting thing to see. But the point of this particular frame that I introduced last week was to be able to think about these platforms in a more analytical way, from a, how do I go after ROI? How do I find the channels that work, because we know that if you miss out on those Wild West periods, or you miss out on a channel that's productive for you from an advertising perspective, then it's just gone. That period doesn't come back. And so you part of being a good digital direct marketer is being on top of the traffic sources in a way that allows you to enter in and put your focus there when it's working. And the usual way that everybody does that is they wait to hear a bunch of other people tell them that they've had a huge amount of success already, right? And so you're always trailing, which means you're always missing a significant portion of that super productive ROI period from an advertising perspective. And thinking about it this way, and it's really, once you see this frame, it's really easy to look at. You can go to the business of apps. I'm going to try and do this on a more quarterly basis, and like, hey, let's just keep track of the user growth and how well the monetization is happening. Does it seem like this is a place to be yet? Does it seem like a place that maybe this isn't a place to focus for the next 5 years, because it's kind of starting to decline in terms of its user growth? Because Facebook, for instance, is scaled, right? It's huge. It's huge. It has scale, but they've had their first quarters where they reported negative user growth, right? That has happened. And so their only ability to grow is in two directions, right? It's through acquisitions of new platforms, like they did before with Instagram and others, and it's through increasing their own efficiency on getting money out of their advertisers, right? And so that becomes a kind of a dangerous model from an advertising platform perspective, because then the accountants and the internal folks are trying to hit their numbers, and they start to squeeze the advertisers, and then all of a sudden the platform becomes unproductive, and then it can be like a death knell of their model. Not that I'm predicting that for that, but I'm just saying, like, that is the way that those things kind of evolve. And these are not like mysterious life cycles of businesses, right? This is just kind of the nature of an advertising model. So that's it for this one. I do think that, like, this just basic frame of thinking about channels is kind of like the core beginning frame of how to think about what's the next channel that's going to work. Because ChatGPT, when it starts taking ads, like, you have to understand, like, it won't be good at serving the ads right away. They'll have to optimize that. And so there'll be this period of time where it doesn't work, and then holy shit, it works, because they'll have figured it out internally. Just like those of you who've been here with me for a long time, remember the period of time when Facebook doesn't work. Facebook doesn't work. Can't make YouTube work. There was that period of time, and the user growth was coming. Everyone knew that the platforms were popular, but the advertising model wasn't quite dialed in. It wasn't working yet. Nobody was really getting it to work. And then all of a sudden it turns on, and it gets effective. And then the ROI is huge. And then all the people who were like, it doesn't work. I can't get the scale. I can't do that. Like, they kind of ignore it now, because in their mind, they've already proven that it doesn't work. And then they miss that period of time when all of a sudden it clicks on and it starts working, and then you have like this great ROI period, and then they try and rush back to it later. And so timing in life, but in general, is important, but timing in digital direct response and in marketing is extraordinarily important. And when it comes to, like, where you advertise, knowing the where in the advertising platform cycle your size business tends to work the best and when it will get the highest ROI is a really important thing to time and to think about, because it's different for you if you're a $2 to $5 million publisher versus you're a $150 million, $200 million publisher. There is a slightly different time frame when things will work best for you, and the larger publishers will have a larger time frame that starts later than it does for you in terms of being able to give them the scale that they need. And they can play through a longer, more expensive period of traffic on any platform than somebody who's a smaller publisher, because you won't be able to float your ad spend for 8 to 10 months on a more expensive basis. And so it's also very important for those of you who aggregate traffic and sell it to others to be on top of this, because this is then like part of your ROI gap too, is when you can pull more prospects into your network via a cheaper platform, then you have a bigger gap between what you can spend and what you can sell it for. And so I think this is a core frame for how to think about advertising platforms in a digital environment. Anyway, that's it for me. Hopefully that's useful for everybody, or at least for some of you. And I'm going to stop it there. All right. Take care. Bye.